Hey everyone, I'm Thane Rosenbaum. I am the creative director of the Forum on Life, Culture, and Society at Truro University. And welcome tonight to our FOLCS Conversations on Essential Cinema series, a wildly popular series. And there's lots of you out there around the world watching this. Tonight's film, Judgment at Nuremberg, 1961 Academy Award nominated film. It received 2 Oscars, one for Best Screenplay Adaptation and for Best Actor for Maximilian Schell. Our special guest tonight is Judge Denny Chin, who you'll meet in a second. Before I say that, did you guys check out that sizzle reel? It's new. I really love that. I could watch that again and again. We are coming to you today live from our FOLCS studio. It's our new streaming model. I hope you enjoy it. It's so new that I'm going to have to tell you some little directions. Say in the bottom, you'll see there's a button for donate. If you want to share the love with FOLCS, which is one of your favorite nonprofits. There's also, more importantly, I have to say, there's that. There's also a send to your friend button. As you know, FOLCS events are enormously entertaining, super smart, and you learn a lot. So it's very often the case that you're watching and you go, you know what, my cousin Phil would love this. I've got to send this to Phil. So everyone has a cousin Phil. You push the send button, set it up for Phil. He or Phyllis will show up immediately into the studio. So that's a new little gadget we have. If you have any questions for tonight, eventually the studio will have a Q&A button. Right now, we're just going to ask you for tonight to just send it by email, your questions to info, I-N-F-O, at folks.org. Folks, as you know, is spelled F-O-L-C-S.org. Info at folks.org. Let's welcome our special guest, the Honorable Denny Chin. Hey, Denny, welcome.
Nice to see you again.
Many of you know Denny Chin, and certainly from FOLCS, as also as a very distinguished jurist, both as a federal district judge and a federal appellate judge. He is, I think, the second Chinese American to have been appointed on the federal district bench, and the very first Chinese American to have ever been appointed on the appellate bench. And I have always said that we should always keep in mind that he's always shortlisted for a Supreme Court appointment. So if you're watching today, that could still happen. You can say, you know what, even before he was a Supreme Court judge, we saw Denny Chin talking about Judgment at Nuremberg. We've had Denny before. He's a fan favorite.
Thane, I think I've aged out of that one.
I know you're going to say that, but look how youthful you look on camera, Denny. I'm going to still say he's on that list. Denny was with us. He's been with us almost from the beginning. We're almost at our 20th year. Denny was with us when we did the film A Civil Action. I don't even know if Denny remembers that.
I remember.
We did the opening night at HBO, for the series John Adams. Denny was there for that. We did a night at the New York Bar Association on a book looking at the relationship between justice and revenge for a lot of reasons. But one of the reasons is, among many of Denny Chin's celebrated cases, he was the one that sentenced Bernard Madoff to 127 years, Denny?
50.
250.
150 years.
150 years. And we had Denny Chin discussing, among other things, the relationship between justice and vengeance, because that day when Denny Chin sentenced Bernard Madoff, his lawyer immediately got up and said, "This is vengeance." And Denny read him the riot act that it wasn't vengeance. So we had Denny that night, among other people, talking about the relationship between justice and vengeance. So let's start with Judgment at Nuremberg. First of all, I think it's important to point out, Denny, and maybe you can explain this briefly, this is not what people think of when they hear the word the Nuremberg trials, right? This is a famous movie, but when they decided to make a movie about the Nuremberg trials, the public probably didn't realize that there were 13 different trials, and the first trial is not this one. This was, I think, trial number 3 or 4. So maybe you can take us through the confusion that why is it that we have only American judges? Why is it that there are only judges that are being prosecuted? What happened to Hitler? What happened to Himmler? What happened to all those guys? Why did we start with the judges?
Well, most of those guys were gone, but the first trial is called um, the involved four countries coming together. It was the major war criminals trial. And that's the one where Robert Jackson took a leave of absence from the Supreme Court. He was the lead prosecutor, but there were judges from the US, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union with
And they
just
called it an international tribunal.
it was called the International Military Tribunal, and that's true. And that was the first case. There were another 12 trials, as you mentioned. They were not done in front of this international tribunal. The case against the judges and prosecutors was the third of the additional 12 trials. So it's either the third or fourth, depending on whether you count from
Right.
the first one, and it was not an international tribunal.
Which
It was,
explained,
yeah,
go ahead.
it
No.
was a military tribunal, but all three judges were indeed judges from the United States. The prosecutor was from the United States. And so the movie is of the judges' trial, and it's accurate in the sense that the three judges in the movie were American judges. That accurately reflects what happened in the judges' trial.
Right. Well, what isn't accurate is that there were actually 14 defendants in the original trial. So this one only had 4 for Hollywood reasons. They've simplified it, brought down 14 to 4. But
Yeah,
why do you think, again, I know you're not a studio executive. You would have been good, but you're not a studio executive. Why do you think that in 1961, when they decided, let's do the Nuremberg trials, why didn't they go with the big one? Why didn't they go? Remember, you were right when you say Hitler was dead, Himmler was dead, Goebbels was dead. They were not in the trials. The biggest criminal they caught was Hermann Göring. They also had Hans Frank. They had my personal favorite, Julius Streicher. He was a newspaper publisher. We might talk about that later, perhaps. He was a newspaper publisher of the original 24 defendants. He didn't even wear a uniform. And he was listed among the lead defendants. Why didn't they tell the story from the worst people, and instead they went to the judges that didn't gas anybody, didn't cremate anybody, they didn't fire a gun? Why do you suppose?
the judges signed the orders that that called for someone to be sterilized. But I think the reason is the trial against the judges was so much more nuanced.
Yeah,
It's a much closer call whether you should be prosecuting judges. These judges, from their perspective, they were trying to apply the law, and that was a theme you heard from the defense case. They were not making law, and some would argue even in our system today that we judges don't make law, we enforce law, we apply the law, but it made it much more dramatic and much harder. And I think the director Stanley Kramer didn't want the easy cases brought against the major war criminals. He wanted something that was much more nuanced and much more subtle. Yep, go ahead.
but it's interesting that what you just said, because it reminds me of the original trial. And because one of the defenses that kept coming up in the first trial and in all 13 trials, including this one, although this one was, as you said, nuanced, we're really applying the law. But most people were making a different defense outside the judge's trial. We're just following orders. Because until the Nuremberg trial, that was a legitimate defense, that a person could say, it's not my job to question the orders. And especially in Germany, the Germans think of themselves as a very bureaucratic people. And they were very convincing in saying, the argument that Rolf was making, the prosecutors for all of the trials got up there and saying, this is outrageous. Who are you Americans to tell us what to do? We were just following orders.
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons why Yanning refused to participate and didn't say anything initially, is that he felt that there was no jurisdiction. Here were and by the time we got to the judges' trial, it was just American judges, American prosecutors coming to Germany to go after them for actions that happened in Germany. And so there was this resentment against that happening. But even Yanning by the end was saying, I reached my verdict before the trial. I was going to find him guilty no matter what the evidence was. And so, and who knows, Yanning changed his tune by the time he
can you ask, do you know why? I would have gotten to this question later, maybe, but now that you opened it up, it's a good question. What turns Yanning in the movie? Why does he start where he doesn't want to speak at all, and then he ends up making his own speech against advice of counsel?
Yeah, I think part of it has to be seeing the evidence come in. He was apparently a very well-regarded judge, and he saw the evidence coming in. One of the controversies is showing the videos of the camps. When the Allied forces got to the camps, they took videos of everything. And in law school and evidence, you talk about bloody photographs and do you overdo it? The danger of unfair prejudice. But you could see why the evidence was so effective, and I think that turned it. The witnesses testifying, the Judy Garland character, Irene Hoffman, she was very powerful, and I think seeing the evidence, as a judge, he was persuaded, and I think that turned him.
So that's interesting. Two things about that. The first thing is that most people don't know that the very first time that Americans actually saw this footage was not in documentary films. It was in this movie. That it had an enormous effect on America in 1961. That this was before PBS was showing documentary films. This movie takes a lot of time. I don't know how many minutes it gave it, but it gave a lot of time. So it's interesting. You say the movie, the internal footage of the camps affected Yanning. But what's interesting, Denny, is it also affected the audience watching the movie because they weren't used to it. They hadn't seen it. So it might have turned the audience as well into, oh my God, I had no idea what we were talking about here.
Yeah, well, there were debates about what's the point of doing these trials. They were creating tribunals, writing laws, creating procedures for crimes that had already been committed before. There's something in the Constitution that's called the ex post facto clause. You can't create a new law or a new punishment for someone for an act that had happened before. But one of the great benefits of the trials, even though in the end the sentences were drastically reduced for most people, one of the great benefits was gathering the evidence, gathering the documentary evidence, making a record, not just for the trial, but for history, including putting in the videos, establishing the number 6 million or possibly many, many more. And that was absolutely one benefit of this trial. And so the movie builds on that benefit by now disseminating it to a wider audience. And with all these great movie stars in the movie, it just drew big audiences. Being nominated for a dozen Academy Awards, people watched it, and it really. So in that way, it really did serve a purpose as well.
And also to explain a little nugget of the 1961, which most people don't think about, which was it was a very big overload to see this movie for 3 hours and to know that in April
in black and white.
Yeah, but in 1961, in April, the Israelis had already kidnapped Adolf Eichmann. So here you go. You're going, oh my God, this all happened at the same time? Yeah. People were watching Judgment at Nuremberg. The Academy Awards, I don't know if it had been out yet, or by April of 61, the Eichmann trial had happened, which itself was covered all around the world. So now all of a sudden, one of the original Nuremberg defendants who would have been one of the 24 in the original military tribunal. He would have easily. He had escaped, was in Argentina. The Israelis kidnapped him. So you can try to imagine the amount of overload culturally in 1961 to watch this movie and to then pick up the newspapers every day and watch the news at night and see film of the Eichmann trial. So, you know,
And
I
of
don't
course,
know.
the world was different 60 years ago. We didn't, have the internet and the streaming and all of that.
Yeah.
This was, my wife and I watched it Saturday night. This was in some ways a painful movie to watch,
Yeah.
and it was painful today. It was painful in 1961. It's
Yeah.
3 hours long, black and white. Much of it is very depressing. There's very little action. The biggest piece of action was Richard Widmark driving his car. The most of it is talking. Most of
Yeah.
it is indoors. The few outdoor shots are of destroyed buildings. So it's really kind of depressing. But we were riveted. And I think I don't know what the attendance figures were like, but it's such a compelling, well-acted movie. I certainly think it did a lot of good.
So I have two questions that come out of that. First of all, the audience should know that Judge Chin is really good at this because he stumbled into something. He said it in a better way than I will, which is to say, well, why do this? He used the word history, which is a different way of thinking of justice. There's legal justice, there's moral justice, and there's historical justice. And so that this trial can be justified on the basis of historical justice. Why? Well, the question I'm going to ask Judge Tin now, if you're right, Judge Tin, and there were 3 American judges doing this, and Nuremberg is just a bunch of stones, you just said there's nothing happening in Nuremberg, why make 3 older white guys go all the way out to Nuremberg if you're going to have them be the judges applying American law? You already told us that they
Well, it
weren't
wasn't.
applying. Why would we go all the way to Nuremberg where you couldn't get any decent deli takeout? There are no restaurants. Why go there if the whole point was it would be an American trial under American law?
Yeah, I don't know that they applied American law. I think they created law for this trial, for these trials. From a couple of perspectives, why would the judges go? The Spencer Tracy character is.
Well, no. Why wouldn't they just make it easier? Just go to Foley Square where you live.
No. Well, two perspectives. One is, why would the judges themselves travel all the way to Nuremberg? And then the second question is, why not just do it in Foley Square in New York City? So they're separate questions. On why would the judges go and give up 8 months of their lives and live in, relatively difficult conditions without their families. I think, that's why we become judges. That's why some of us become judges, to help, make the world a better place, to help the administration of justice. And there was not just historical justice here, but moral justice. Let's no longer have attacks on the peace, war crimes. That part did not succeed because we still keep seeing all of this. But I think from the personal point of view of the judges, it was something that they felt it was important to participate in. Why not move it to New York, Foley Square, the courthouse here? I think that would have made it even more tenuous in terms of the jurisdiction thing. But part of this too was to help Germany, send a message to Germany, and not just Germany, the world. We are doing this because this is the right thing to do, and it made great sense to do it in Nuremberg. And apparently there was this beautiful palace of justice in Nuremberg, and so just as a practical matter, that's part of what they wanted to do. But a big part of what happens in the movie is politically they wanted to go easy on these defendants because they wanted the support of Germany. They wanted the support of the German people. They were concerned about the Soviet Union. And doing it there it enabled the German people to follow more closely. And I think those are all reasons to do it there.
But
And I think it would have made it much worse to try and do it in the United States.
well, it would have been it it is true what you say that there was a geopolitical factor here that
Yeah.
the pressure is put on the prosecution to let's get this over with because they know this is not the first of the trials, right? They know what the audience doesn't know, that they've already had the big trial and they don't really mention the big trial. So, and they don't really talk about that there's going to be 8 more trials. So you can understand, the Secretary of State is probably going, this is not good for the Cold War. Berlin, there's a Berlin,
Yeah.
there's a wall, there's a Berlin blockade. Germany is now cut in half. How many trials can this happen? It's going to only alienate West Germany if all we do is keep prosecuting different packages of defendants. But I do think that what you said about not being in Foley Square is that historical justice requires that the housekeepers of Spencer Tracy's home, where is he staying, they need to see this. That this can't be something that they read about in the newspaper in Foley Square. They have to know that this is happening downtown. They have to know that they're being judged, all of them, because Spencer Tracy throughout the movie is very, I would say, diplomatic with them. He doesn't ever say, oh, give me a break. What do you mean you didn't know? Everybody knew. So he kind of does it in a kind of Midwestern style, right? An interesting way, because I think he thinks they're lying, right?
Yeah,
He thinks,
well,
yeah,
there's
go ahead.
certainly some skepticism there on his part, but as you say, he was very diplomatic about it. But you would not have put German judges in place to try this case. You have German judges trying German judges. That wouldn't make any sense. What might have made sense was an international tribunal. I don't know why they shifted away from the 4 judges from 4 different countries in the major trial. I don't know what the reasoning was for going with 3 American judges, and I don't know what the actual vote was in the movie. It's a split vote. It's 2-1. So
And
I
in,
don't
and
know
in
what
the
happened.
and in the original trial, Denny, of the 14 original judges, 10 of them received life sentences and 4 of them were acquitted. And as you said earlier, all 10 of them did not spend very long in jail. They had life
Yeah,
sentences.
I don't think it's correct that they all received life sentences. The ones who were
Oh,
convicted,
yeah,
some of
you're
them.
right. I think you're
I
right.
remember someone got a 7-year sentence, but many of them did get life sentences.
But
And
nobody was the line that Rolf says, the prosecutor at the end, I bet you at a certain year, all of them will be out. Remember that at the end of the
yeah,
movie
yeah,
when he comes and visits Spencer Tracy, the prosecutor says, and Spencer Tracy's character doesn't care. He still thinks that if it's true, you may be right, but that doesn't change that we did the right thing here. I think it might be useful to also tell the audience, I suspect you know some of this, which was that these 13 trials was something that wasn't obvious that the Western powers would implement. It was almost the judicial mirror image of the Marshall Plan, because Winston Churchill was opposed to this. Henry Morgenthau, remember at this point, F. Franklin Delano Roosevelt is dead at this point. So his former Secretary of Treasury, Henry Morgenthau, who's the father of Robert Morgenthau, who for many years was the district attorney and U.S. attorney here in New York, he was the only Jewish person in the cabinet. And he and Churchill thought, you know what the right thing to do is? Summary executions. You see a Nazi, you shoot him in the head. Just shoot him in the head. Why would you spend millions of dollars flying people out to godforsaken cities that are all filled with rubble when you can just shoot them in the head? So it's interesting when you said the word moral justice, there is a debate about that. right? I mean, in the end, most of these people got out of jail early. They didn't serve their all spent sentences. There is, I think, a moral argument to say, the shooting in the head is not a bad remedy. And,
Yeah,
and
I think not necessarily in the judge's trial, but in some of the other trials, a few were indeed executed. Um, uh, Chief Justice Harlan referred to this as Jackson's high-grade lynching party. And there was certainly some thought that this is a waste of time, and why don't we just execute them all? I don't see how you could simply execute. Maybe the top folks who in the military, but how do you execute judges? Even assuming they knew what was going on, how do you execute doctors? Some of the defendants were actually organizations, companies.
well, but let's be clear. In the
Yeah,
first trial,
in the first trial.
there was the Krupp, which I think that family still exists. They were industrialists. They may have made the military equipment. The guy who ran IF Farben, who made Zyklon B, the gas, they wanted him. He was just a guy who had a company who made the gas that went into the death camps.
You know better than
again,
me.
Yeah, go
but
ahead.
the ovens, there was a company that built all these ovens.
Yeah, built the ovens, right?
Yeah.
So you're gonna say, yeah, maybe they didn't shoot anybody, but they built. And I love, my personal favorite, as I mentioned, that guy Julius Streicher. Julius Streicher was the publisher of a newspaper called the Der Stürmer, and the Der Stürmer was like the big tabloid, like the New York Post, with sensationalist covers every day. And literally, for some 1933 till Kristallnacht, the Der Stürmer had back pages that said, Jews stink, Jews are vermin, Jews are not German, Jews are evil. And he did this for years. And so Streicher was treated like he was a first-line murderer. And it raised an interesting legal and moral question to say, if you're going to do that, and by the way, Denny, I don't know if you know this, the same issue came up in the Rwandan genocide, because there were these people that owned radio stations in Rwanda, and they used to send out messages during the genocide, chop down the tall trees. And the Tutsis were taller than the Hutus. And every one of the Hutus knew that tall trees meant go take your machetes and chop up to death the Tutsis. And when these radio broadcasters said, I was sitting in my office the whole time, you know what they did? They raised the Streicher argument. They said, you should not be treated any different than the guy who had the tabloid. So all I'm trying to say is that there was a significant number of people. Harlan was not alone. There were a lot of people that thought the Nazis got off easy with these trials.
We were talking earlier about moral justice, and how do you offer up a better lesson just by immediately executing them?
Good point.
Or going through
Good point.
This process.
You mean the documentary footage? You don't even see the documentary footage. You just shoot somebody in the head.
Yeah, but beyond that, it is a lesson you send. We're just going to summarily execute people, or it's a lesson you want to send. We are going to give these people an opportunity to be heard, due process with defense counsel, rules of evidence, and I think the concept was this will send a better message. This will show that how we should be doing this instead of just summarily killing people. Also, one of the things about the film that I thought was excellent was, I mentioned earlier there was nuance. The case that they talked about a lot,
Feldenstein.
Yeah, well, actually, not. I was thinking about the sterilization case.
Oh, right, because there was an actual case called the Katzenberg trial. The Feldenstein case with the elderly Jewish man accused of having sex with. That actually happened. There was a case called the Katzenberg case.
The Judy Garland character. I mean, that was very important. But there was when they did the sterilization, the Montgomery Clift, the
Yeah,
character.
got an Academy Award nomination for that.
Yeah. Um, and on cross, the defense lawyer is cross-examining and using the quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes. There actually was a case decided by the Supreme Court in 1927 upholding the forced sterilization of a woman because she was feeble, and he used a line which is 3 generations of imbeciles is enough. That is actually from a Supreme Court opinion. And I think, it raises these hard issues. The United States is doing something not obviously to the same extreme, but forced sterilization of people because they're deemed to be imbeciles. And I think that kind of thing, was terrific in terms of really making you think about these things. And it was not a one-sided, simplistic situation.
I think your point earlier cuts to this argument about nuance, right? These people were not the people that put people in ovens. These people dealt with things like master race stuff, like sterilizations and the impure blood of Jews and homosexuals. So
the
that in a
Felsenstein
way,
case,
yeah, go ahead.
the Felsenstein case was the law that said a non-Jew, I'm sorry, a non-German, a non-Aryan could not have sex with an Aryan, and the penalty for that was the death penalty. And they who knows if the guy even had sex with the Judy Garland characters. I mean, she contended that they did not, and that it was just almost like a father-daughter relationship. But Yanning, the judge, said he didn't care and he was going to do this.
Yeah, but they make it creepier, Denny, because of the age difference, right?
Yeah.
The Feldenstein case, there was actually a case, the Katzenberg case. They demonize it worse by making the age difference. It's bad. It's not like Romeo and Juliet. They take an elderly Jew and they put him with a young Aryan, and they go, you see these filthy Jews. Look what they do. He could be her father, and look what he did. So you can see it's a little creepier. But let me go back
to although they were trying to use it in defense,
right.
We were not having sex.
Yeah.
He was like a father to me, so it kind of cuts both ways. But I think you're right. The creepiness aspect of it is stronger than the other.
Yeah. And the other thing that you said, which you reminded me, well done, about the Oliver Wendell Holmes quote, because I thought the film was a little, not manipulative, but unfair, because I thought when he breaks down the character with the mental difficulties, the room goes a little silent. And it's as if the argument is, he's not healthy. And do you really want him to have children? Like it leaves the audience there also to question, not just Oliver Wendell Holmes. Right. The audience is supposed to sit there and go, I'm not saying Hitler was right. I'm just saying maybe there is an argument here that people with these infirmities should not be able to have children. And I thought that was a very manipulative movie moment, because it really can get you to go, yeah, you know what? Maybe, it doesn't look good on trial that this is
manipulating. It's manipulating you to think about these things. And and here we are having this conversation. Yeah. So I think it's good manipulation.
Yeah, no, I'm serious. I think you're right. It was intentional. Let's talk a little about the jurisdictional questions. You mentioned it before, but I think there's a number of things the audience should know. Like, for instance, in the original first trial, Justice Jackson may have been a Supreme Court justice, but he wasn't really a trial lawyer. And so he had it rough. You read the book by Telford Taylor on the Nuremberg trial. It's a great book. I don't know if you've ever read it, Denny. It's great. Telford Taylor basically says Justice Jackson was out of his league. He really did. He didn't know what he was doing. It's not his fault. He's not a trial lawyer, wasn't a prosecutor. He had been an attorney general, and the German prosecutors technically were winning the arguments. They were winning the arguments, but they weren't going to not going to win the trial, but they were winning the arguments. Like, for instance,
You mean the German defense lawyers? You said
I'm sorry, the German,
the
right? Sorry,
lawyer.
the German defense lawyers, Denny, were
Yeah.
crushing it, and for the reasons maybe you can explain. Criminal conspiracy is something the Germans didn't know anything about. We tried them on the basis of organizational responsibility, means if you had a Nazi card, that was enough. Well, but think about it in the United States. If you went into the South and went into homes and pull out a white sheet for the Klan, and you just showed the white sheet, that would not be enough to prosecute people. Can't prosecute people simply because they're a member of the Klan, right? So you could see how the way we use the law, organizational responsibility, criminal conspiracy, the one point you raised earlier, the ex post facto clause, you can't punish a person for a crime that wasn't a crime when he committed it. There was no crime called crimes against humanity. You're right. We invented that. We invented it for this trial. So you can't apply it the first time you invent it. So maybe you can talk a little about how, in a way, it was a legal trial, but it had a moral outcome because there was no way we were going to acquit any of the mainline Nazis.
I mean, this was very much a political process. The whole thing was political. And it, the goal was historical justice, moral justice. And so that's a big part of what was driving this. And although they were creating these laws, however, you look at the horrendous nature of what happened. 6 million people killed. Surely there were international law principles that were violated here. Just basic rules of decency. You can't.
But Denny, what about the argument? Sorry, but what about the argument? I was just following orders. The Nuremberg trial sets a whole new precedent, which provides an affirmative duty to disobey illegal orders. Now, if you go to West Point today and tell people that, they'll throw you out. They will say, get out of here with that. What do you mean? Nobody has an affirmative duty to disobey illegal orders. If I give an order to somebody, they're supposed to carry it out.
Yeah, well, if I'm a judge and I make up my mind before I see a lick of evidence, and I know how I'm going to come out even before the trial, and I'm doing it because I'm following orders, to me, it's not right. You can't, there's just basic human decency. So what should they have done?
Is that what happened to Yannick, in your opinion?
Yeah, part of it was he was saying he convinced himself that it was for the good of the country to go along. And I think quite a few people thought that. There was that one witness who said he resigned.
Yeah.
And there was something to be said for, I could have resigned, but it was harder to stay and try to make things better, even though I know it was bad. I mean, I think that's a fair debate. And I think Yannick probably did, at least, the Burt Lancaster character, probably did believe that he could do some good by staying rather than abandoning the whole thing and running away. But it was so bad that by the end, he realized that just by becoming a part of it, he was absolutely doing the wrong thing.
Denny, you should know most of the defendants, the vast majority of them, when they made finals, do you have anything final to say? Because remember, of the original 24, I think a dozen were hanged. A dozen of the original were hanged.
Yeah.
Only one of them, I think Hans Frank, all of them were indignant that they did the right thing. Nobody had a Yannick moment. Nobody.
Well, it's a time of war, and things are different in a time of war. Judges do different things in a time of war. Look at the internment situation here in the United States, the internment of the Japanese, and the Supreme Court upheld it. And then many years later, Chief Justice Roberts said it was wrong the first day it happened.
It's considered a national embarrassment.
And it's because of military necessity. These judges believed that this was for the good of the country, and they went along with it. They were also misled. They were misled by the Department of Justice. But I think that's part of the dynamic here that was happening to some extent. But you're right. I mean, they convinced themselves that what they were doing was correct, and so, and ultimately, it wasn't just judges. There were other folks who didn't, fire the guns or inject the gas, but they all, they had a role. And
But what about what Rolf says? What do you think about Rolf's big argument, the prosecuting attorney? His big argument, Denny, is if my guy is guilty, everyone is guilty. Everyone in our society played a role. If you delivered bread, if you were in any way involved in helping the Nazi regime, you are complicit. And so if you're going to take a guy who's a judge that writes legal treatises and treat him as if he's a war criminal, then you have to do it for the person that's baking bread and shipping it off to the Nazis to eat in the front.
Well, in any criminal case, in any conspiracy, there are different levels of complicity. You've got the people on the top. You've got the mules who are just carrying drugs. One of the fascinating things here was the question of collective responsibility. We did not know. The two servants in the house. They said something like, "We're just little people. We didn't know." And then I think it was Richard Woodmark, the prosecutor, was saying people were being, or maybe it was actually Yannick himself, people were being snatched away, and our neighbors were being snatched away in the middle of the night. There were cattle cars of children being brought into our railroad stations. They must have known. They must have known to some extent.
But that cuts both ways, Denny.
Yeah.
I think when I hear that, you know what I think? I think they're also saying, who am I to step in if they're putting people in cattle cars and sending them away?
Yeah.
Why would I risk my neck?
No, I agree. What can I do?
Yeah,
what can the little people do?
These guys mean business. The Nazis aren't kidding around.
Yeah.
They'll kill you. I'm not going to do anything.
Well, it's a hard question, but they weren't prosecuted. But if more people had spoken up, who knows if something could have been done. We don't know. And even the prosecutor was saying, are we all guilty? But he was also trying to say, he did say none of us really knew what was happening, that the camps were held in secrecy. So it, again, nuanced, not crystal clear, not black and white. That's a lot of what was going on here.
Right. And you're saying by focusing on the judges, it gives more of that than the pure evil of mass murder. Because
I think it raises the hard question, in a way that is certainly more interesting. And Yannick at the end says, maybe we didn't know the details, but it was because we didn't know, you know, and that was a strong indictment.
Here's something most people don't know. I'm not sure if you know. After they did the 13 trials, right, exhausted, 4 years, 4 or 5 years of this, they continued to do stuff. They called them denazification proceedings. They continued stuff. And my favorite example is they went after a guy named Wilhelm Furtwängler. If you're a classical music fan, you know that Wilhelm Furtwängler was the conductor for the Berlin Philharmonic between the wars. And Germans believe that classical music is their mother music. That's their music. Beethoven, Brahms, Schubert, Mozart, right? And so you'd say, what? He ended up being acquitted, but Furtwängler was not a Nazi. He even saved some of his Jewish musicians. He gave them money to try to get them to escape, but they put him through a humiliating denazification process, and his career never recovered, and he died earlier after this. And there were people on the side of the West that said, if you were making music for the Nazis and this was their favorite music, you were cheering them on at night so that they go to sleep, waking up in the morning and giving them the spiritual sustenance to get up and to kill more people the next day. Now that's a tough one, right?
That's a tough one. And I think that's one where, maybe you say you're guilty, but you don't deserve to be executed. You don't deserve a life sentence. Again, what's the culpability? What kind of a sentence is deserved? I wanted to just mention briefly, when I watch law movies, I always am interested in how realistic it is. I thought this was pretty realistic. There were a couple of things that didn't make sense.
You mean the proceedings?
Yeah, the actual trial itself.
Right.
I thought the examination was pretty good. It was pretty realistic, but there were some things, too much yelling, too much shouting, badgering of witnesses. I would not have let that kind of thing go on. The prosecutor taking the stand all of a sudden and testifying about the films. But on the other hand, these were military tribunals. They created the law. They created procedure. So it's possible. There's also the scene where they're having dinner. Richard Widmark has had too much to drink, and he comes over and he's having a conversation with the three judges about the case.
Yeah,
That's something that was not very,
because they shouldn't have had no contact with each other.
Absolutely.
You reminded me of something earlier when you talked about the rules of evidence and the appropriateness of showing that video, the documentary footage of the camps. I couldn't help but think, I know this cheapens the whole point, but I couldn't help but think that I don't think people understood the argument in the Trump trial about Stormy Daniels' testimony, right? The idea was, it was very similar in a way. They're saying, in American law, you're not allowed to introduce evidence just for the sake of poisoning the jury. You can't, so that if you play the video of the skeletons in the death camps, how is my client ever going to get a fair trial? He didn't put anyone in a death camp. He didn't put anyone in a crematorium. How do you expect my guy to get a fair trial if you're going to show this kind of evidence and to contaminate the trial? So I think that's something our audience needs to see, how irregular that was.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a hard call whether it was irregular, whether it's admissible. But there's
you saying you would have, as a former federal trial judge, you would have admitted that testimony.
I think so.
Wow.
And here's why.
Wow.
The basic rule is a rule called Rule 403, and you weigh the probative value of the evidence against the danger of unfair prejudice, waste of time, etc. And I think here the evidence was probative. It was relevant. There was a high risk of prejudice, but you didn't have a jury here. You weren't prejudicing a jury. So for the reasons we talked about earlier, making a record, etc., I think it was appropriate. I think I would have let it in. Now, if you had a jury, you'd have to think twice about it. It'd be a much harder call.
That can I tell you something, Denny? That's a great FOLCS moment. We're going to take a clip of that and use that. That was a great moment. That was a great historical FOLCS moment. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Now here's something that you're usually not asked, Judge Chin. I want to talk to you about the love story, because the movie is also a forbidden love story, I think. And I want to see what you think about that. The widow, who was the wife of a former general for the Nazis.
Marlene Dietrich.
Marlene Dietrich, who, was a legendary German film siren who had a very strong career in the United States. And putting her in that movie was a stroke of genius, to make her play the dignified woman, a German woman who knows the role that her husband played, at the same time is proud of being a German. She's proud of her people, and she knows. But I think there is a relationship. Spencer Tracy is a widow man. They clearly enjoy each other's company. But I do think that Abby Mann, who wrote the screenplay, is trying to send a message that this is forbidden love. What do you think?
That might be. I very much enjoyed that part of the movie. You know, it also helped in just in terms of filmmaking, break up some of the all the courtroom
Yeah, but
scenes.
Denny, it doesn't have a Hollywood ending. Hollywood ending,
No.
Denny, is he says, I've decided to become a German. I'm going to move from where I live in the United States, and I'm going to marry you. That's the Hollywood ending.
I don't think you could have a Hollywood ending for this movie, and I think it did help illustrate some of the struggles and tensions. Spencer Tracy clearly was drawn to her and attracted by her, and enjoyed her company. She invited him to the concert with the pianist. Speaking of music, music was a big part of this.
Yeah.
But she was also, I think, trying to use him to some extent, influence him to some extent. She claimed that her husband, her late husband, didn't know. I don't know how believable of that. She was trying to lobby Spencer Tracy that Yannick was a very good man. So it's all it was. I thought they had a very interesting chemistry there. I thought also using Judy Garland was also terrific. She did a really
Denny,
good
Judy
job.
Garland hadn't been in movies for a while. She apparently was very excited to get asked to be in this movie because she'd been out of films for a while.
Well, and she was struggling. She played a character that was very torn, and she did a marvelous job of doing it. But I think having both of them, both of the women in the movie, was terrific.
All right, here's a tough question, Judge. Really hard, very hard. Abby Mann.
Are you getting questions from the audience now? Is that
we're gonna see? We're coming close.
Okay.
Here's a tough one. Abby Mann. Abby Mann wins the Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay. This originally was a teleplay. The original version of this was on early television in the 1950s, and then they adapted it. The speech that Spencer Tracy gives at the end in announcing the verdict is very long, and you don't normally get something like that in a Hollywood movie. You don't get a monologue like that. What does the speech mean?
Well, I think I'm not sure I know what it means. I think he was trying to explain what was going on and what his thinking was. And again, he knew that this was going to be a controversial decision. There were some people thinking he should be lenient, and he gave the maximum sentences. I think he was saying, there can't be excuses here. That we can't say, we just can't sit back and say and close our eyes to things, and that it was important to do justice, even if it was the hard thing to do. And in his way, I think he was trying to fulfill Justice Jackson's goal of trying to bring justice to this, to end crimes against humanity and crimes against the peace. And I think he was being a little idealistic, but it was important for him to send those messages.
All right, I'm going to take a question from the audience now.
Okay.
I'm going to build around it. I'm going to take this question and build around it. The question essentially,
at the very end, I see now what my notes. The tribunal stands for justice, truth, and the value of a single human being. And you have to stand for something, and that was the key to what he was saying. Go ahead. Sorry.
Good. So, what is in your mind? This comes from essentially two different audience members with a little of me thrown in. So it's going to be a series of convoluted questions from the audience. but
All right.
they're important ones, Denny. What is the legacy of Nuremberg? The United States never signed on to the International Criminal Court. We were laggards. One of the questions says, we were laggards when it came, even with the United Nations signing up for the Genocide Convention. We don't trust. We were the inventors of the International Tribunal, but we don't trust the International Tribunal. Bill Clinton refused to sign the Rome Statute in 1999. That we have not been a signatory to the ICC. That means that the ICC cannot indict any American for anything that would approach a war crime or crimes against humanity. Guess what? Israel isn't a party either. The states that don't want to be in the dock, and they think they will be, aren't participants. So there is a sort of question of what was it for if we really don't have international tribunals after?
Well, I mean, there are international tribunals that have addressed a number of different situations, whether we participated or not. What's the legacy of the Nuremberg trials? I think there's a strong legacy here. I think it was a good thing that they did it, even if it didn't succeed in every respect. It certainly hasn't put an end to crimes against humanity or crimes against the peace. But it's aspirational to some extent. I think it did help Germany heal to some extent. I think it did help the world heal to some extent.
One of the questions from the audience, Denny, says there are people that still deny the Holocaust.
Well, and there will always be people who deny it, but there are probably a lot more people who understand and appreciate what happened because of the historical record that was developed here. There are some people, just like in Germany in the 1930s, there are people who don't want to believe what they ought to know, and they're just ignoring it. Take a look at the videos.
It's there.
There are a lot more people who understand what happened and believe it. And because there are a lot more people who understand and believe it, there's less of a chance that this will happen again.
One last question, very quickly. This also comes from the audience. When it came to finding Nazis in the United States, we ended up deporting them and not prosecuting them. Why would we do that? Why wouldn't we say, after Nuremberg, we don't just kick you out of the country. We know what you did was wrong. And we kicked out a lot of people who served as guards in death camps. The most famous one was Demjanjuk, who lived in Cleveland, but there were a number of them over the years. It is an interesting question. Why denaturalize and deport? Why not prosecute for crimes against humanity? Is it because we didn't have jurisdiction?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't know for a fact. My best guess is that it's got to be jurisdiction. There were no crimes committed in the United States by these individuals, other than perhaps sneaking into the country. And the solution,
which is that's why they get deported.
They get denaturalized.
They get right.
Yeah, right. I mean, there may have been some prosecutions, but it would be hard to prosecute someone here in the United States for crimes that they committed in Germany.
Okay. All right. Before we say goodnight to Denny, we got a few closing announcements. We have an upcoming event, our annual, there it is. Our annual, this is another fan favorite. This one is also live and virtual with our partners at 92nd Street Y. So if you're around the country and you want to watch it, you can watch it virtually. You have the QR code. This is called Law of the Land 2024. I think this is our 9th or 10th year. It's a super popular series where, in a very entertaining, interesting, accessible way, we break down all the major decisions of the Supreme Court and explain it just like Denny and I explain the Nuremberg tribunals to you. You get the whole year of the Supreme Court explained by those four very attractive people, smiling. Everyone's having a good time. That's Mark Stern from Slate on the left, Jeff Braven, who is with the Wall Street Journal, and that's William Trainer. He's the dean at Georgetown Law School. and that's Tiffany Graham, who's a constitutional law scholar at the Truro Law Center. That's on July 8th. Let's see, that's one event we have coming. We have other things coming up, but we're prepared. Yeah, there's a donate button. You had fun tonight, and we're one of your favorite nonprofits. Could you always use the financial assistance? Thanks so much. And of course, we always want to know who you are, and so we can invite you. Yeah, stay in touch. Take a picture of our QR code. We've got tens of thousands of you out there that we speak to regularly with all of our events. We send highlight reels. So stay in our FOLCS community. Denny, this was really awesome. You are the Lou Gehrig of FOLCS. You've been with us many years, and you never disappoint. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Did you
Pleasure.
have fun?
I had a great time. It's always fun with spending time with you.
Thanks, Denny. Me too. It's a long relationship, and we're very grateful for your friendship with FOLCS. I'm Thane Rosenbaum for FOLCS. Until next time, we'll see you again. Thank you. Good night.
Bye. Take care.